Progress.
Procedure and Related Matters Act, number 9 of 2009. Then we will also be receiving a briefing from the DTIC and the CIPC on the response to the recent grey listing of South Africa by the Financial Action Task Force, also known as FATF, and as well as on the progress made in relation to the implementation of recommendations emanating from the State Capture Report, also known as the Zondo Commission. So the purpose of this briefing is to receive their response to the recent grey listing of South Africa by FATF, as well as progress made in relation to the implementations of those recommendations from the State Capture Report. We will also be considering the first draft of the study visit report, and also then finally be looking at the third quarter program. So we have a packed agenda this morning. So can I, without any preamble, invite the Minister and his team? Are they on the platform, Andre?
Correct, Chair. They're on the Minister's on the platform, Chair.
Thank you very much. Minister, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good morning to you, Chairperson, to members of the committee, the Deputy Ministers. I'd also like to greet the staff of Parliament and the officials of the DTIC and entities who are present. Chairperson, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide an overview of the work of the department in quarter 4. Honourable members will recall that just more than a year ago, we had tabled the annual performance plan. We had introduced in that plan the cross-cutting themes of industrialization, transformation, and a capable state. And it began the first leg of a 2-phase reorganization of our annual performance plan that resulted in the new APP that was tabled at the start of this year. And so what we really were looking at for the last financial year was the impact of our work on industrialization, the work on transformation, and strengthening the capability of the state to address the challenges in markets, in the economy. And this will be the last of the quarterly reports for the past financial year. In a few months' time, we're going to do the annual report, which will pull together the 4 quarters' work. And so we will provide today, Chairperson, just a few snapshots of the work done in the 4th quarter, with the intention of consolidating the broader story when we do the annual report. We're going to use the presentation just to illustrate the work, and I will move fairly rapidly in light of what you have indicated is an agenda with a number of items. But because it does cover a fair bit of work, there will be moments when I would like to just set out in a bit more detail the work that we've done. I would like to make the point, Chair, that the report by its nature doesn't cover everything that the department did in the quarter. That would be too voluminous, but it does identify some of the key areas. And those areas that we have not covered today, I hope we can do some of the summarizing of that, the aggregation of that when we do the annual report. Chairperson, I'm going to ask Tsulu Mushi just to project the presentation on the screen. And with your permission, Chair, I'm going to put my video off so that we don't have connectivity challenges my side. And I'm going to then go straight into the presentation. So the first part of the presentation is the introduction and context. And it can really just serve as a broad summary of what we're going to cover. There will be about 35 case studies that we will briefly run through, as well as a number of sections of work from the economic context to the work we've done on industrialization, jobs, innovation. At the last meeting, when I was presenting on the annual performance plan, one of the members of parliament asked about skills development. And so we've decided to put a few slides together on what we're doing on skills development. We'll cover master plans, film, regulation, governance, trade and investment engagements, and then have a look at the annual performance and financial report. So part one then is the introduction, and we make the point there that the report provides information on the impact of the work by the DTIC, and it is within the frame of our strategic priorities, and those are set out, and I have commented on that. If we go to the next slide, this was a snapshot as at early May, and it highlights the single biggest challenge that we have faced in this quarter, which is the load shedding and its impact on manufacturing. The next slide looks at some of the other challenges, like domestic inflationary pressures. They've begun to slow down, although food inflation remains a serious concern. The combination of these energy challenges and inflationary pressures, coupled with the higher interest rates, are beginning to impact on business confidence. The GDP for Q4 declined by 1.4%, and there were fears that this could start the beginning of a possible recession. However, as GDP data for Q1 of the new financial year registered a 0.4% growth, South Africa avoided what would have been, at the very least, a technical recession. Turning to our trading partners, Germany has gone into recession, together with a 20-member Eurozone group of countries. And this is quite important because it may affect South Africa's exports to a large market for both commodities and manufactured products. So we're going to be watching that very carefully. On economic performance, the Statistics South Africa surveys have indicated progress, a little bit of progress on manufacturing. I first turned to manufacturing output. It increased by 1.4% from the previous quarter, and that was following a decline in Q3. 4 of the subsectors recorded positive growth. The strongest growth is food and beverages, which is quite an important one because that makes up a very big part of the manufacturing. And the biggest decline in this period was glass and non-metallic minerals. The next slide looks at manufacturing sales. This increased by 4.6% from the previous quarter, and it follows now 2 quarters of growth. 7 of the subsectors recorded positive growth, and 3 had negative growth. Out of the figures that we have on this slide, the one that I would draw attention to is food and beverages, as well as motor vehicles at 6.3%, because again, it makes up a very big part of the overall manufacturing index, whereas petroleum products is a smaller part of that index. Furniture was very pleasing to see a growth, given that we are working now on implementation of the furniture master plan. And like we saw in the previous slide, glass and mineral products from a manufactured point of view have declined in this quarter. The slide that we have on the screen now looks at employment growth. Employment for the quarter grew by 1.6%, which is an improvement from the previous quarter growth of 1.1%. And overall employment in Q4 is just over 8.5% higher than in the same period last year. And we've now seen employment growth for 7 consecutive quarters. Again, I would point to the importance of finance and business services. That would count, among others, also what is happening in the call center area. Community and social services could include the work on the social employment fund that the DTIC is involved in. And agriculture is an important driver of jobs because there are significant numbers of jobs in agriculture. Where we had a very large decline is in private households. These would typically be domestic workers and gardeners who work in individual homes. And that, of course, is also quite important. Typically, that subsector has at its height about 1 million people. So that shows some pressures on households with a reduction in domestic work. The next slide then goes to energy interventions. And in the Q3 report, we had indicated, we had put quite a significant part of the report to deal with energy. Our work on energy has 4 broad areas. It's a support for new energy generation through measures such as unblocking and promoting investment and addressing regulatory challenges. The second part is assisting firms with adaptation strategies, such as the Energy Resilience Scheme. The third one is promoting longer-term energy efficiency in the economy through technical standards work. And the final one is promoting industrialization to ensure that South Africa can develop security of supply, both of components and the job created in the process. The DTIC developed 8 interventions, which were put to Parliament on the 14th of March. And we took the report on the implementation to about the 12th of March. So it covered most of Q1. For that reason, what we will do, Chairperson, is do a more comprehensive report on the energy interventions in the next report to Parliament, which is the Q1 report, given that during the budget vote of the department, I had also elaborated on the measures we had taken on energy. The next slide just summarizes the roadmap that government has put together. The Minister of Electricity, together with colleagues who are responsible for energy, looking at from 2023 through to 2024, what the energy landscape is expected to be, with the quantities of energy that will come from rooftop solar, from resumption of operations in Kusile units 1, 2, 3, and 5, the private sector embedded generation projects, the surplus capacity from existing IPPs that will be pulled into the grid. And then it also goes into 2024 with the renewable bid window 5, where this is like an auction to get private sector players to put up their hand and bid to build the energy capacity for the future. There's also the battery storage bid window, and then it goes beyond 2024. The next slide then takes us to the 3-month impact, looking at industrialization with the various areas that are covered. And in this slide 14, we say that the DTIC mobilizes incentives through the fiscus, but also partnerships with the private sector to enable structural transformation and support the firms to enhance their competitiveness. There are a number of non-financial support schemes, from rebates on duties to trade tariff support and actions by our authorities, the competition authorities and the development finance institutions. And they all come together to look at how we can expand local production. In the next slide, we look at auto production. I have already covered manufacturing production in the previous section. So on auto production, for the 12-month period, the South African car making industry built 548,000 vehicles. These would be cars and bakkies and trucks. And this is an increase of 10.6% compared to the previous 12 months when we had built just under 500,000 units, 495,000 units. We've also put in the number of units for the quarter, and this is January to March. And this is a decrease of 2% compared to the previous quarter. Normally with both quarter 3 and quarter 4, we take into account that there's the holiday shutdown period. But in this period, we also saw a slight decline in new vehicle sales and some softening of exports. On the whole, taking the year as a whole, the achievement of 548,000 units was a very important milestone for the recovery of the sector. And it is particularly important given that we estimate that Toyota lost close to 50,000 units as a result of the flooding. So had we not had the flooding, we would have done even better over this period. In slide 16, we look at investment. The DTIC supports investment in the economy through the work of the IDC and the NEF, and they fund from their balance sheets and through the DTIC incentives that they administer. The DTIC also directly provide incentives to companies, and this includes SEZ support. The DTIC has investment in a spatial industrial development branch, which supports employment creation and industrial development. There's trade and competition commitments that are made by private firms. There are efforts the DTIC undertakes mainly through the Invest South Africa unit of the department. And we do work to secure investment pledges for the investment conferences convened by the President. On the next slide, 17, we look at a few programs and entities of the DTIC and the sums pledged. It was a good quarter for receiving pledges from companies, and honorable members will see that it totaled 107 billion rand out of the investment target that had been set for the previous year of 120 billion. Now, this is always a strong quarter because it's the last quarter of the year. So all the work that is done during a financial year typically comes together in quarter 4. But it's also the quarter just before the investment conference. And the investment conference it was the last one in the 5-year cycle that we had worked on to achieve the target the President had set of 1.2 trillion rand. So in both the past quarter 4, as well, I hope in quarter 1, which is the one we're in now, we should see the investment numbers in both of them to be higher than average, because the one year, they both straddle the period when we were closing the various pledge commitments in time for the investment conference. The other significant ones was the investment by the IDC and its counterparties, as well as significant commitments that were secured from our measures in competition policy. In the next slide, we take a case study of a milk dairy business with facilities across the country. And here we look at the opening of a facility, an expansion of the facility in a rural area, Bonnievale, which does, among others, cheese production. And they had spent 100 million rand in the project value, and they inaugurated the plant in April this year. The next slide gives an example of some of the South Africans working at Lactalis. Musleko Fagan comes from a village 26 kilometers outside of Polokwane, but she now lives and works in the Western Cape, and she's responsible for audit and risk management, and she tells her story. She's got a master's degree and is an example of the investment that we've made in skills development as a country over a number of years. That means there are South Africans who can now do these kind of work as businesses expand, and that we don't need to rely purely on imported skills to do this kind of work. The other example is Nontobeko Zwane. She was raised in a small town of Glencoe in KZN, and she works in project management from the inception planning right through to execution, monitoring, and control. So it's quite an important work in a dairy farm or a dairy processing plant that has to source its milk from a number of different farmers. So just getting that production process going is an important part of the work there. And she has a BTech in mechanical engineering. The next slide then turns to another case study of Daimler-Benz Distribution Center. And while I would not normally point to this kind of facility, I have put it in because, among others, it illustrates that this company has 752 solar panels with a battery bank capacity that was installed on the parking bays of 7 rooftop areas to generate backup power. And it covers a few of the buildings that the company has. There's a total of 800 people employed by Daimler Truck in South Africa as a whole, and about 300 work in this new facility. And Deputy Minister Gina represented the DTIC at the opening. The next slide goes into other examples of local output that had been secured. The single biggest one is the work that we do in with the auto industry, which is the tooling and the components, not just the assembly. And that had generated 8.7 billion rand. The other big one is also right at the bottom, the competition policy, which is a matter we'll come back to. It's a new brewery and maltery to be established within 5 years of a major merger. We also have significant sums from the investment branch. A big part is the Tshwane SEZ, and the other big one is from the IDC, 3.5 billion rand. The next slide then gives a brief overview of our localization policy advocacy and some of the work we've done in the light of the Constitutional Court judgment on the preferential procurement regulations. And so the department has been working directly with organs of state, because the court held that organs of state are able to set their procurement policies. And during this period, there was work with Transnet, as well as with AXA on the request for proposals, where localization and local industrial capacity were added to the tender requirements or the request for proposals. The next slide then looks at the project. This is a particularly interesting and significant project. And the DTIC is responsible for national space activities through the South African Council of Space Affairs. And we facilitated late last year quite an interesting and important project. And this project was by a company called Dragonfly. It's a South African company. And SACSA facilitated the launch of the first of a commercial Earth observation satellite, which is called AgriSat. It's the first imaging satellite designed and built by the South African company Dragonfly, and it's the first manufactured in South Africa since 2009. The satellite was launched on the 3rd of January and can monitor up to 1 million square kilometers daily. And it really looks at monitoring plants specifically for the purpose of improving farming from the point of plant health and stresses. The data that's gathered can help to increase the yield of agriculture areas while reducing water usage and the use of harmful pesticides. So this is a high-tech area where South African expertise is able to put a significant component into a global project. And the next slide continues by providing a little bit more information that this satellite was put on the SpaceX mission, what they call ride share, where you can put a satellite capacity on this. And the launch involved the procurement of components and services of about 10 million rand from local suppliers. And it will enable companies to continue with future projects of building a constellation of satellites and firming up localization through involvement of other companies in the sector. The successful launch of the satellite highlighted South Africa's role in contributing to space industry. And it's not the only company. There's also a few other really interesting case studies of this. In the big scheme of things, while we need to work very hard on labor-intensive sectors. We need to be able to contribute to job creation through generating more jobs in areas like agriculture. These high technology interventions also contribute, because in this case, honorable members can see the direct impact it has on the farming sector in South Africa. So it's a good combination of high-tech and labor-intensive sectors, how they feed off each other. The next slide then provides a little bit of information on our work on localization. This takes the PRASA example of trains manufactured at the Gibela facility and the reopening by PRASA of its Cape Town Central line. This is the busiest line in Cape Town, servicing Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain. The next slide provides information on industrial procurement. We take the example of the National Industrial Participation Program, and this is a project looking at the production of passenger railway wheels, and it's based here in Gauteng. It's also we also see on the next slide another example of industrial procurement in the automotive sector. This is one that's done by Volkswagen when they landed the contract to supply motor vehicles to the South African government. They had an obligation to localize more of their value chain, and the jobs are in areas like press operators, maintenance managers, logistics and process engineers. And we indicate there the kind of components that are sourced. It'll be the sealing part, the cross-member cover part, batteries, and so on. In the next slide, we talk about a company called TrueFit. They're supported by the Aerospace Industry Support Initiative, and they're based in Johannesburg. And they were able to secure international certification that enables them to export using TrueFit's products. And we've already seen that they've generated 600,000 Rand in local revenue and 100,000 Rand in exports in Q4. TrueFit is a 51% Black-owned company with a very large employee ownership and a large number of females also. And there's an example there of Justina Matsau and Zach Mangena, who are assembling a valve position indicator in this. We turn next to the work that's being done by the ECIC. This is our entity that provides risk cover for exports, and they were able to generate risk cover that secured 54.6 million rands worth of South African goods that are used in those export efforts. I turn next to the special economic zones. We have provided quite a bit of information on Tshwane in the last meeting, so I'm not going to repeat Tshwane, but here we point to some work in the Kuga SEZ, this is quite an important one. It's in the Eastern Cape, and they've secured a combined capital investment pledges of 892 million rand, and this was in companies in a number of different sectors. For example, in the cement area, SEMSA will invest 100 million rand to expand a warehouse and their plant and equipment. San Miguel has done a lease agreement for a processing of citrus facility, and they will invest 492 million. And this plant will include refrigeration and freezing facilities that will contribute to 112 operational jobs and 50 construction jobs. The final one is Vanguard, also a facility in the Kuga area, and they do storage and repairs, and their estimated investment is about 300 million rand. The next SEZ is the Richards Bay IDZ. The most significant investment there is the Wilmar Processing, which is a company that is doing the palm oil processing plant, valued at an estimated 1.2 billion rand. 21 new jobs were created by the project in Q4, and we expect and hope that with good progress, this plant will be operational during this financial year. The other example is ProStar Export Paint, which has a total investment of 141 million rand, and they've laid the foundation, and they're now getting support with a top structure funding, which will then generate a rent income that can contribute to the cost of the IDZ in Richards Bay. The next one is the East London IDZ, and there they've worked on the project on Bushveld Electrolyte in the chemical sector, and a big warehouse that's linked to the Pepco group, and the total value of operational investment in that IDZ now is 5.8 billion rand, and there's some pictures to show some of the work that has been done. In the next slide, we look at the incentives of the department. For the quarter itself, the department had enabled incentives to firms in South Africa of 6.1 billion, which brings the annual figure to 30.3 billion rand. As regards incentives that were actually dispersed, money that leaves the bank account of either our entities or our partners, 26.2 billion rand was secured, and this is higher than our annual target, and this was because we were able to get partner funds mobilized through these competition agreements. And just inside the DTIC group itself, the projects are in 49 of the 52 municipalities, and 41 of these are largely rural districts. The next slide just indicates in each of the provinces the kind of local municipalities that are covered. Some are quite small. The support would be on a modest scale, others are very large, and that depends on the quality of the projects that are put up and the amount of capital and funding that is required in these projects. The next slide just really highlights that manufactured exports amounted to 178 billion rand in Q4. And then we provide a little bit of information on the following slide on what had been achieved. Our exports to the rest of Africa hit a new record in the financial year, and exports exceeded 100 billion rand in every quarter of the financial year for the first time. Some of the other highlights are set out on the screen. 24 billion rand exports of ferroalloys, and this is partly because we've had record chrome prices that's driven a surge in ferrochrome exports. There's also been 18 billion rand in export of light trucks, like bakkies and SUVs, and they've had the best fourth quarter on record. 3.2 billion rand in export of cosmetics, driven by particularly more exports to other African countries. And our total exports to the continent of cosmetics surpassed 2.5 billion rand in the quarter alone. We've also had 2.2 billion rand in the export of steel bars and rods. And so we've broken the 2 billion rand barrier for the first time. There are 22 countries where we've export and where there's been an improvement, and we've had the best Q4. And what is important about it is half of them were outside of the traditional export region of Southern Africa. In the next slide, we provide a little bit more details on exports. 24.3 billion rand that was registered by 4 programs of the DTIC. 2 of them are branches and 2 of them are entities, and the numbers are set out there. So if I take the first one, it's monies that were secured for South Africa through export value. And the first of those were duty rebates that were provided to the auto industry that enables them, through the value that's unlocked from those duty rebates, to produce locally. So without those rebates, the local production would not have the commercial rationale. There wouldn't be a logic to producing locally outside of those duty rebates that is part of the scheme. Some of the other big numbers is the 2.8 billion rand right at the bottom, which is the export of services. These are global business services through the call center program of the DTIC that earns foreign exchange for South Africa. The next slide provides a bit more detail on the work done inside the export branch of the DTIC from exhibitions and missions, 9.4 million. It is on the low side for this quarter, and I have raised that we need to be doing more work in matching the right players for these exhibitions so that we can secure even better outcomes. And we had 17 South African companies with export orders. They included spices and dried fruits and dialysis chairs and industrial kitchen equipment. The next slide looks at the measures taken to support exports outside of the main metros. We've excluded for this purpose Joburg, Cape Town, Tshwane, and eThekwini. And they are important engines, and we value the work that we do in the big metros. But we want to make sure that we expose businesses outside of those main metros also to export opportunities. And there were 17 companies from 10 non-metro districts and 4 companies from metros that were outside of the largest 4 metros, and all the details are set out in the little table. So honorable members will see these companies came from areas like Capricorn, Nkangala, the West Coast, Ugu, Mopani, and so on. And we've also focused on some of the smaller metros like Buffalo City, Nelson Mandela Bay, Ekurhuleni. The next slide provides information on the work that the ECIC has done with the direct export cover. Previously, on the previous occasion that I referred to the ECIC, it is the local products that they help to pull into our export effort by when they do a risk cover, they're often able to get those companies to agree to use South African-made products. And in this case, we look at the actual insurance cover, which was worth 8.8 billion rand. For the year, they had 5 projects that amounted to 9.1 billion rand. The next slide provides a bit of information of the human impact and the granular detail of what we do. So if I can start with a company called Dash BPO, a company in the United States, and what they do is they set up an operation here in South Africa, and they provide services to companies in the United States and Canada. So when you phone you've got a complaint about whether it's your mobile phone or your bank account or your rates account, and you live in the United States, you call a local number. That phone call gets rerouted to South Africa, and someone like Matshidiso Mokele, who is a customer service representative, she'll answer your call. She'll have a computer screen. She'll have knowledge. So you're a citizen of the United States. Maybe you work you live in Baltimore, and she'll have all of your information. She'll be able to follow up. Why is there a query on your account? So this company employs a number of people here in South Africa, and 396 of them are young people, and 300 are female. Now, we've got what we call non-complex jobs, which is routine queries, but they're also highly skilled jobs where high level of knowledge is required, sometimes of finance, sometimes of legal process. And these are the kind of jobs that we want to make sure that we also grow that number of jobs. And the company generated 118 million rand in export revenue over the last 2 years. The next section deals with jobs, ownership, and transformation, and the impact of our support measures to drive industrialization for communities is felt through transformation that provides opportunity for more South Africans, and it promotes broader ownership in the economy. In this period, we point to the challenges that we've had, as well as the opportunities that we've picked up and run with. In the next slide, we start first with the impact of our coverage, the master plans. There are 7 master plans that in total, they cover 614,000 workers in the different sectors. The next slide provides information on the projects that we have outside of the master plans. Now, there's some overlap. Some of the ones on slide 45 are in businesses that may have a master plan, and others are in businesses without a master plan. In the new financial year, we will be providing net figures that we can see what's the total impact. But just to highlight a few of these, we have 65,000 workers covered by the Social Employment Fund, and I'm going to give a case study later of that. We have 178,000 workers covered by competition settlement guarantees, where firms undertake that they're not going to retrench, they're not going to reduce their aggregate employment, or they're not going to retrench current staff. And then right at the bottom, the other big figure is jobs covered by trade interventions, anti-dumping duties, and so on that we've counted. And in between, in the middle, we've got examples, smaller examples. For example, new jobs created by Black industrialist projects, 3,400. For example, the full-time equivalent jobs created in filmmaking, 552, and so on. If I go to the next slide, we look at the trade one, and we've just broken it down into the impact of our work on various aspects. For example, tariff increases and rebates in place would account for 93,000 jobs, anti-dumping duties for 31,000 jobs, and safeguard duties for about 427 jobs. The next slide provides information, taking what I've referred to earlier, the Social Employment Fund, and just providing a little bit of information on it. At the last presentation, we covered quite a few projects. So here we've just taken one project to look at, but we will be providing more information at the next in the next presentation. And what this one was, this is the African Conservation Trust. It's one of the partners who receive funding from this fund that is administered by the IDC. And their core focus areas are environmental conservation and work done on socioeconomic work in vulnerable communities. And in November last year, they did a survey of the household size of people who work in the Social Employment Fund, participants in this fund. And it was very interesting because it shows the indirect beneficiaries that the project impacts on. And right at the bottom, there's a table which shows in Free State, for every 502 participants that they surveyed, there were 1,936 indirect beneficiaries. So if you take the direct and indirect, 2,438 people benefited from that, which leads to an average household size of 4.9. In KZN, the ratio was even higher, with a 9.1 average household size of people who are drawn from this project. And it shows, therefore, that the impact of the work that is done with these special funds is much bigger than the numbers that we normally announce, because our numbers would only provide the direct beneficiaries. If I go back to the earlier slide, slide 48, it makes the point here that at the end of Q4, jobs created by the SCF totaled 65,000, and the target set by the president was 50,000 jobs. But at the end of the financial year, we exceeded this by 15,000 jobs. And this was partly because more applicants were received than anticipated. And fortunately, the drop-off rate was low in this period. And this fund was also highlighted during the recent state visit to South Africa by the Belgium head of state. If we go to the next section, which is competition and trade, and in slide 51, we note that to boost job creation and support economic growth, as well as to promote inclusion and protect consumers, our trade and competition agencies are very important. And we point to the work that we've done with a few large mergers, small business measures, and trade-related measures. On slide 52, there was a significant merger that was finalized in this quarter. And the merger involved Heineken buying a controlling stake in Distell and pulling together a merger of Heineken, Distell, and Namibian Brewery. And the department and ministry intervened in the merger, and we secured a quite significant set of public interest commitments, with the company committing to spend 10 billion rand in capital expenditure, 3.8 billion rand investment on a new greenfield brewery, and 1.7 billion rand investment on a new maltery. And the investment will have quite a few positive impacts. It will reduce Heineken's import of finished goods. It will reduce the import of barley into South Africa. We want to grow more barley. It will support approximately 279 permanent jobs, and it will support 900 agricultural jobs. These are farmers and farm workers who will be providing the feedstock, the inputs that go into these new investments. The next slide continues with Heineken, and it provides examples of other commitments that they've made. They've committed that they will source more than 80% of key inputs locally, and this will include malted products, grape wine, dairy products, apple juice concentrate, and the various compounds and flavors that they use, maize that is used in this process. And they've also committed that they're going to spend 4.7 billion rand helping to buy from small businesses and businesses owned by historically disadvantaged persons. So that would be a part of the enterprise support. And then they've committed to worker ownership, that within 3 months of approval, they'll put in place an employee share ownership plan, which would be valued at about 3.5 billion rand. And on the employment side, for 5 years, they'll maintain the total employment numbers that they had at the start of the merger. On supplier development and other funding support, they've made a number of commitments which amount to 775 million rand. And the merging parties have agreed, so this is now Heineken, that they will spend 400 million rand for investment in SMMEs and suppliers that were historically disadvantaged. They'll promote agriculture, research and development, and support Black women-owned and controlled businesses so that we unlock the gender dividend, where women are often the head of households, but really struggle to find employment or entrepreneurial opportunities to run their own businesses. So they want to contribute to that. They've put 200 million rand aside in a localization fund that can support localization even beyond their own value chain. And they've put in place money to support the upgrading of taverns. What we see there on the slide is Traven is actually a tavern. And what that involves is turning places that are often just drinking sheds where men go and consume vast quantities of alcohol, to introduce food into that, proper sanitation, lighting and so on, to make it safer so that they become places where families can sit down and have a small meal together, and just change what has been a legacy of really quite inhuman beverage-driven, alcohol-driven places into a different facility in communities. Slide 53 goes into a different merger. This is the Mediclinic merger, and in this merger, there were some quite interesting elements to it, and because of the focus at the last meeting with the Committee on Skills Development, I thought it would be good to just pull out some of the things that we do in the DTIC that we don't normally report, because the challenge always is what to leave in so that a presentation is not over long. Already they are very long, and I do acknowledge that. But given the work that the department does, it is important to highlight skills development from time to time. So in this merger, Mediclinic agreed to train 1,700 nurses to provide 30 million rand in medical training grants, working with the National Department of Health to do a spending on medical training at the Donald Gordon Medical Center, and to spend money on grants and loans to support clinics in poorer communities, in underserved communities where there are often not clinics available. In addition to the skills component, there were also a few other interesting things. They have what is effectively similar to a profit sharing scheme. We're not counting it for now under the worker ownership scheme because we're still looking at the modalities that will be put in place. But about 12,000 workers will benefit from this employee benefits scheme, where they get a portion of the profits that's generated by the company. There's also a commitment to capital spending of 5 billion rand, and they'll spend 5 billion rand also on procurement from small and medium-sized companies and Black-owned companies. And an interesting element of it was in the conversation between the parties. One of the areas that the company then offered they would be prepared to do is to address surgical backlogs in the public health sector. Over the next 5 years, they'll do 1,000 pro bono surgeries. These are surgeries that they will do, little operations that they'll do free of charge, and they'll engage with doctors to encourage them also to assist with these pro bono surgeries. The next slide looks at tariff measures. And we did a rebate on titanium dioxide used in paints and varnishes and dryers to enable increased production in South Africa. And this rebate allows local manufacturers to import these inputs on a cost competitive basis. And after they receive their rebate permit, Kansai Plascon committed to increase the output of its product for the following 3 years by about 7%, to maintain total employment at 790, to invest 15 million rand in plant and machinery, and to enter into a cooperation agreement with a company, Nyanza Light Metals, to support local titanium dioxide development, so that we can eventually produce the titanium dioxide in South Africa. And this is an anticipation of local production in Richards Bay within 30 months from the date of implementation. And there are some pictures. On slide 56, we look at a few tariff measures. I know this is a very busy slide. And this looks at work done under the APDP. And they are an example of a company called the DES Group, which is a South African company, tooling company, with support offices in the United States, Germany, Thailand, and Mexico. And they manufacture and supply turnkey tooling solutions to the auto industry. And so they've in the past supplied VW, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Nissan, Toyota, and GM globally and locally. They participate in our master plan program, and they employ 464 workers in South Africa, of which a significant number are young people, and they have 57 females. The next slide provides another example of tariff measures. And these would be work we finalized in this quarter on thermal paper and front windscreens. We've withdrawn a rebate on demineralized whey powder because it's not been used since 2018. We've combined, we've also implemented for combined fridges and freezers a facility that will, we hope, increase investment in this period. And then we've introduced a temporary rebate for titanium dioxide, the example that I've just given. Next slide would then provide a bit more information on a case study on tariff measures. This is a company called Kido. And Kido does these baby clothing that honorable members would see in the big malls. And what they were able to do is use fabric that had been brought in duty-free under a special rebate agreement that had been reached. And they were able to increase their production volume over this period. They support a number of small businesses through their CMT, that's the cut, make and trim program. And the investment has increased quite significantly in this period by about 900%. Obviously, these are off financial bases that are commensurate with the size of the businesses. The next slide provides information on worker ownership. In this quarter, 9,500 additional workers were covered by agreements based on the work that the department and the ministry had done on worker ownership. And if we count those ones where the Competition Commission had done work on its own without the DTIC needing to be involved, it brings the total up to just over 10,000 workers. The single biggest one was the Heineken Distel one, which covered about 5,000 workers. And honorable members will see there the numbers for a company called One Logics, 2,000 workers, and Epco Oil Crushing, 1,200 workers, and Emerald, 1,000 workers. The next slide goes into details on the kind of areas we're working on in mergers. The next slide thereafter, slide 61, looks at the BEE program. We have something called the Equity Equivalent Investment Program, and we highlight one case study, which is on the next slide. And this is a company called KT Digital. There's a young entrepreneur who set up this operation. He provides information and communication technology services to other companies, developing software and selling software. And they used a loan from one of the EEIP programs to just do a complete overhaul of their products, and it helped them to expand. They're now in Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Eswatini. And they had a business. They'd also set up a company in Dubai. They now have 20 IT specialists, which include business analysts and so on. And you see a picture there of Toriso Rangata, who is the founder of the group. The next slide provides another case study. This one is of a black industrialist manufacturing these pharmaceutical plastic bottles. And there's a nice picture showing the kind of products that they do, from jerry cans to these small PET little containers that we use when we've got flu and we want to take cough mixtures or whatever. And Abankobi Packaging is a black-owned company in Cosmos City. They started to distribute plastic bottles. And as they saw increased demand, they moved from just being a distributor to be a manufacturer of this. They were supported through the Black Industrialist Scheme, and their business now is an investment value of some 80 million rand. And they buy all of their raw materials locally. So not only is it their output, but also their supplier output that supports. And they have 14 people in direct employment and 20 people through subcontractors working on the project. The next slide then goes into a example of what the plastic bottle business means for ordinary South Africans. And there is Katlego Shiloane, who's a machine operator, and Wellington Dube, who's a quality assurance manager. And they tell their story. With Katlego is qualified in electrical engineering, but he had no prior work experience. So he was hired as a driver, in spite of the fact that he had this capability, this skill rather, that he had acquired. And so he started as a driver, and while working in the company, they saw his potential, and he became a machine operator. And he's gone for further training, and it really changed his life. So very often with stories like this, when we go into the life histories of people, we see how a job transforms the life of South Africans. He lost both parents and obviously faced a really bleak future. And the ability to get into a job just, he says, transformed his life. Wellington was a quality controller in one of the competitor companies, and he joined Abankobi in March and received training. And he started as a quality controller, but then became a manager, and he's a breadwinner and father of one child. The next slide goes into the example of a manufacturer that makes these baby diapers. It's LM Diapers. They're in the Dube Trade Port in KZN, and they've invested through the DTIC scheme in building and machinery and equipment. And they are producing from July this year. They've already secured export orders to Lesotho and Zimbabwe, and they've signed an agreement with Dis-Chem. It's a fairly new company, but it caught our eye that they're already donating baby diapers to non-profit organizations. And the company has 28 jobs, 70% of whom are young people. The next slide provides information on case studies of other workers in this company. Nokubonga Mkize, who's a sealer for diaper packs. And you'll see the story of Nokubonga. We also have a junior machine operator, Ngobi Mapumulo, and Nonkululeko Tele, who's a quality controller. So these are our stories of South Africans whose lives are changed. The next slide provides an opportunity just to make a concluding comment that over the past year, significant progress was made with empowerment of workers at firms that they're employed in. Our provisional tally is 132,000 workers have obtained access to ESOPs in this period. Now, this was an unusually fertile period for worker ownership because we've had a very large merger, but also because it was the first year that there was this concentrated focus by the competition authorities and the ministry on unlocking worker ownership. So we're not expecting that we would have this level of increase in future years, but we're building the base of worker ownership in the economy, where workers are partners with entrepreneurs, with investors in building successful South African businesses. There's also a greater emphasis on growing Black industrialists in productive sectors in the economy to ensure that we build the base of those entrepreneurs who really drive every economy. In the next slide, we then turn to innovation and technology. We deal with skills and enterprise development. And I'm going to start with slide 69 and provides an overview of work we're doing in these three areas of innovation and technology, skill development programs, and enterprise capability. It's not a full setting out of all the work the DTIC does. It takes a few of them and highlights it in this presentation. The next slide goes to the innovation and technology area. We do workshops to build capability. We did one on the 14th to the 15th of March in Free State, in Bethlehem and Vicksburg. And these include science and technology students, existing innovators. There's also a grassroots innovation facilitation project. And the first targeted province for the program was Limpopo. And we'll highlight one of the companies. And then the Intellectual Property and Technology Commercialization Colloquium was held in March at Northwest University, and we'll have a slide on that. The next slide then goes into a little bit of the detail, the Grassroots Innovation Facilitation Scheme. Here we give an example of a manufacturing company based in Nobody Village in Capricorn, and it was set up by Puleng Motupa, a 28-year-old resident who lives in Gamutapo in Limpopo. And the company was registered already in 2014, and it had a startup capital of 2,000 Rand. They manufacture non-electric slow cookers and reusable sanitary pads that they sell to local businesses and inhabitants around Polokwane. The slow cooker, of course, helps during periods of load shedding, and that's the story there. There's more details that we provide, where the company was listed by ShopRite, Macro, and Pick n Pay, and you can also buy products through Take-A-Lot. The next slide provides information on the Intellectual Property and Technology Commercialization Colloquium with Northwest Northwest University and the CIPC. In commercialization, the first thing is to come up with really great ideas and then to register them. The second one, which is harder, is to commercialize that idea. And so Deputy Minister Majola was present to help inspire young innovators on what we can do to bring their products to market. The next slide provides a little bit more detail on the colloquium and the small businesses that were supported. The next slide goes into skills development program, the DTIC internship program for unemployed graduates. It often gives them their very first exposure to a job and make them more employable. And last year, the program had 45 women interns and 78 participants in all. And Deputy Minister Gina hosted the graduation ceremony for the interns. The next slide goes into a skills program story, where we've taken the example of Boltini Chuma. She's from Mdansani in the Eastern Cape. She graduated with a national diploma in mechanical engineering at Walter Sisulu University. And for 3 years, she struggled to be accepted into a professional candidacy program just to gain the work experience that you need for an engineering technician with the Engineering Council of South Africa. And through the DTIC internship, she was placed on a 3-year engineering candidacy at Delbing Engineering in Pretoria. And while she was on placement, she got permanent employment at the company, and the registration as a candidate engineering technician and professional engineering technician is now underway. And so really, this was just an example of a South African who needed one door to be open, and she'll take it from there and drive her own contribution to the economy. The next slide goes into the story of Zizipo Dilika, who is also from the Eastern Cape. And it tells her story. She completed a Bachelor of Technology in Communication Sciences in Applied Languages. and she tells a story of how the program empowered her, as it really teaching her the skills of working in a team. The next slide is the story of Fizeka Giyosi, and she was a qualified accountant, and this helped her to secure permanent employment and just introduced her. So we've taken examples from one part of South Africa. There are obviously many other examples in other parts of the country, but it was to highlight the work. The next slide. It looks at the Textile Center of Excellence. DTIC set up this laboratory for the CSIR to conduct textile research, to host PhD students and fund undergraduates. We also have a Fashion Design Innovation Center, and 75 students and youth received financial support last year for this. Some of them fashion designers, and I hope that members of parliament would be one day able to proudly wear the products that those young people are making. Slide 79 looks at the Insimbi Future Production Technologies Initiative. The DTIC loves acronyms, so you'll see the acronym IFT, and that stands for this Production Technology Initiative. And it's industry driven, and we do it in partnership with businesses where participants have on-the-job training, and there are training facilities in 4 provinces, and we see the breakdowns, the demographics there. So I'm sure we can work a little bit more on the demographics in future. Slide 80, we've got an example of skills development program. This is Puseletso Mutle, who was qualified as a tool maker after completing this program. And she's a female tool maker. And during her final year, she was placed at a company called Hentic in Centurion, and she was offered employment during her placement. And after her training, her mentor immigrated, and she was asked to manage the tool room. So sometimes with these opportunities that come from a little crisis that a company has, you see someone like Puseletso becoming the first female and youngest programmer in what had up to then been a fairly male-dominated company. And she was 22 years old, and she grabbed this opportunity, passed the trade test, became a qualified tool maker. She was later promoted to manage and operate the wire section of the company, and again was the only artisan who manages 2 sections, which is not unusual, with many females being able to multitask better than males. She's applied for a lecturer's position at the Center for Excellence in Gqeberha. She's furthering her studies in industrial engineering through UNISA. So this is really an example of someone who is pushing to make her mark in the world. The next slide, 81, tells the story of Lance Johnson, one of the top performing students, and the work that he had done and the opportunities that he had secured. Slide 82 gives the story of what one can call the Ford 4, 4 trainees, students nominated through the Ford South Africa program. And we've just taken these examples of Kele Bochile, Charmaine, Cynthia, and Philip. And they were selected to have both exposure and on-the-job training, and they're working on the Ford Ranger exterior tooling. The next slide looks at the Workplace Challenge program, and this is aimed at improving productivity and competitiveness at firm level, and it helps with training managers and employees to adapt to world-class productivity best practices. It's administered for the department by Productivity South Africa, and last year 57 women out of 101 participants access the programs. And one of the beneficiaries is a company called Akani Paints. It's a Black woman-owned entity in manufacturing, and they in Zanin in Limpopo, and they were approved for the Kaizen program. This is based on the principles, Japanese principles, and we're trying to help them to lift the performance of their factory and improve the work with layout, with partitioning, and with space utilization. Slide 84 just gives a little example of the what it looked like with the work that had been done. The next slide looks at the master plans, and we recall the 7 master plans and why each of these master plans. Some of them are labor intensive with women workers, like clothing and textiles. Some of them are around food security, like sugar and poultry. Some are major earners of foreign exchange and are programs for advanced manufacturing, like automotives. Some are really at the heart of our industrialization efforts with linkages across the economy, like steel. Some support youth and women employment and earns revenue for the country. It's like the global business services. And then furniture is also important labor absorbing sector. The next few slides go into each of these. I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but in clothing master plan, over the quarter, the department registered 369 million rand in investment pledges, and 16 Black-owned businesses were supported, 197 new jobs were created. And on the localization efforts, the rebate facility that I spoke of earlier helped to produce garments with a value of over 1 billion rand. And SARS, the South African Revenue Service, seized 207 consignments of products that it believes were fraudulently imported into South Africa. The next slide goes into the next master plan, the sugar industry. It reports on the efforts on localization, where for the year as a whole, the South African Sugar Association reported that 1.5 million tons of sugar had been produced, which exceeded our master plan targets of additional sugar production. On SACO harmonization, we spent quite a bit of time trying to get resolution of sugar-related issues, and agreed on a transport rebate for Botswana, Lesotho, and Namibia. We also developed a price, also implemented the price payment system to stabilize small-scale growers, and the Transformation Fund allocated 215 million rand. There's a million missing there in that number. And I should indicate, obviously, the sugar industry also went through quite a big challenge with Tongaat Hulett in this period. So a lot of work was done to try to stabilize the industry. This is also the period when the health protection levy increase that had been mooted last year was postponed for a 2-year period to help the industry to stabilize. Slide 89 goes into the poultry industry. What we've done with localization targets, again, we've exceeded those targets, so that was a good thing. What's happened on feedstock, where the food eaten by the chickens that become our food in turn, we provide information there on maize and soybean meals and so on. In investment, the IDC approved 525 million rand over the last number of years, and much of this was dispersed. Slide 90 is a story of Nkanyezi chicken farm, and this is of Lebogang Nkanyezi. She's a poultry farmer based in Chakastad, in Chief Albert Lutuli municipality in Mpumalanga. She owns the farm. It was supported financially to acquire a new hatchery, and the project is estimated to create 4 new jobs and hopefully produce good eggs and good chicken that we'll be consuming in future. Now, some of these are quite small businesses, others are medium-sized, others are larger businesses, because we want to show the range of interventions by the DTIC in promoting business growth in South Africa. Slide 91 goes into the automotive industry. I've covered some of this earlier, so I'm going to skip to master plan number 5, which is the steel industry. We did quite a bit of trade measures, anti-dumping duties on garden tools from China and India, and anti-dumping duty on welded link chains was rejected. So I received a recommendation to put up the duties, but when we looked at it carefully, we found that the evidence was insufficient to justify the duty, and SARS put provisional duties against import of coated steel coils from China for 6 months. The IDC administered the downstream steel industry competitiveness funds, and we indicate 40 million rand was dispersed and 138 million rand was approved. The private sector steel fund was established and capitalized by 2 rand per ton levy that the industry has put on itself. And Q4, we secured commitments in tender or request for proposals involving Transnet Freight Rail and the Airport Company of South Africa for these airport luggage trolleys. The next slide, 93, gives an example. This is of a company owned, it's Almanat. It's owned by Peter Meyer. He started his career at AECI as an unskilled worker loading dynamite. And he has since acquired 36 years of experience in the valve and actuator industry. He's got now a mechanical engineering draft certificate, and he owns this company, Almanat. They manufacture actuators, and they're based in Pinetown. They employ 8 workers, and their product is used in energy, in water and waste, in mining, and in a number of different industrial sectors. He received support from the DTIC through a CSIR program, and that certification that they were able to obtain helped them to improve the quality of their product and their services, and to design and build a test rig, which they use to endurance test their products before they sell. And they've secured 900,000 rands worth of orders from Umgeni Water and the city of Cape Town for water treatment plants. The next slide shows Mr. Gigaba. I don't see his first name there, but Mr. Gigaba has worked for Almanat for the past 5 years, and he's got a national diploma in electrical engineering. He's been promoted to a site supervisor, and he is now enrolled in a programmable logic controllers course, which they can use his skills in the automation of industrial processes. So this shows a really good example of the kind of work that can be done. Grinding media is one of our largest grinding media producers, and they increase domestic sales quite substantially. They're involved in a range of activities, and what they needed import duties to be increased, and 40 jobs were saved as a direct result of this. And we've given a few examples there of what they do. The next slide goes into the Global Business Services Master Plan and the numbers of jobs, young people in particular, and women. And there's a little picture there of Kurt Lee Ngubani at the call center in KZN that supports retail insurance. The next slide is the Furniture Master Plan that the FX Group commissioned a 4.5 megawatt biomass turbine power plant to run its particle board sanding and melamine lines. And the plant is in production in Q4. So this is an example of an energy-linked measure to make businesses more resilient. The DTIC also committed 400 million rand to the Furniture Challenge Fund, and we've got to get the DTIC and IDC to move faster on disbursements under this fund. The PG Bison Mkondo plant has been extended to provide a large additional capacity to manufacture this medium density fiber for the market. And this is a vital component or element that is used in furniture manufacturing. And 355 construction jobs have been created. The next slide is the conclusion on the master plans. They're still quite an important driver of partnerships, and we are looking at how we can enhance the impact even further. The next slide goes into a new section on film production. And this is just so that the DTIC is not seen only as factories and large production sites. We provide Parliament with a few examples of how we tell South African stories. This one, Fesito Goes to Market, is a film series, part of a film series on Madiba's favorite African folk tales. And 44 full-time jobs were created in this. And the 5-part TV series has been well received at many international film festivals, 76 international film festivals. And they won awards for Best Animation, the Audience Choice Awards, Best Producer. And it's really an inspiring story. And at the bottom of the picture, you see the young South Africans who are putting these magical stories together based on African tales that Madiba heard in Kunu as he grew up. The next slide is the story Golide. It's a feature film that tell the story about 2 homeless old-timers who try to get some money from illegal gold mining. The next slide tells the story of an experience in a more funny way of black tax. It's a comedy about Thuli growing up in a tightly knit community where she has to help around with school fees and loan repayments. It's a story we all know from our daily life. And yeah, they make us laugh a little bit about it. The next slide is Family Secrets. And it's about a man who owns a merchant bank and is involved in a hit-and-run car crash that results in a change of his fate. The next slide is Bad Bishop. It's supported through the Emerging Black Filmmakers Incentive. Now, in all of these, we tell stories, but it also creates economic value. And all of that is set out in the slide. And this production was filmed in, among others, Makado, Toyando, and Nzelele in Limpopo. The next slide is Runs in the Family. It's a South African-made movie about a tailor and a reform con artist. And it's a story that tells their storyline. And this was produced in the Western Cape. The next slide is foreign production, and here Expats is a television series. It started filming already in November, and it's about an expat African-American family living in South Africa. The next slide is the new section on regulation. Next slide deals with grey listing. We're going to come to grey listing later in the next item on the agenda. The next slide deals with Cape Flora SA. This is a matter that I highlighted in the budget vote with some beautiful proteas on the podium, and Cape Flora logo has now been protected so that we are able to build this South African linked brand in global markets. Next slide. This is about regulation involving old Reserve Bank issued coins, where we're using the Merchandise Marks Act to protect the coins so that they can't be produced illegally or without authorization. The next slide is the ease of doing business, the work the CIPC Service Center does to assist companies who need to be registered. Often these are young people come in, and the average service standard for a new company registration was 1 day, and we see the volume of registration in that bar chart, 418,000 in the latest financial year. The next slide is public outreach programs on Copyright Amendment Bill. 31 public hearings were held. Broad education and awareness on consumer, companies, credit, lotteries, and gambling laws. There are 578 community participants. And in future, we are going to link these more with these outreach programs in the 52 districts, so that they're not standalone small events, but they become part of a much bigger event. The next slide provides the overview on governance. In this one, we're only dealing with court judgments because we've not dealt with this in a while. And there were a total number of judgments for the year of 11. 7 were in favor of the DTIC. 1 was unopposed. In other words, we agreed effectively with the applicant on the issue, but it was a matter of law, so that the legislation needed to be changed. And there was 3 judgments involving the DTIC group. The next slide just gives the judgments that the department won. Venue scope, it was around the decision of the Director General to reject a claim that an applicant had made. Applicant took the department to court, and the court dismissed the application. The National Lotteries Commission, this was an application lodged in May last year for leave to appeal the judgment in February last year that was in favor of the ministry. Honorable members will recall that I had put a forensic investigation in place into the NLC before the SIU was appointed by the president, and that was to provide some of the information that the SIU could rely on. And the board took my decision on review, arguing that I had exceeded the powers available to the ministry, and that the board, as the accounting officer or the accounting authority, was the only one with the formal right to institute a forensic. We won the court case, and on the 10th of May, the application was dismissed with cost because there are no reasonable prospects of success, and there were no compelling reasons for the appeal to be heard. Then there's a matter involving Solomon Segalo, who lodged an application around a constitutional challenge to one of our laws, and this was dismissed. Slide 116 goes into more details of court cases won by the department, Talyard versus the ministry. This is the constitutionality of another part of our law, the Companies Act. And this is in business rescue proceedings. Moonlighting Films, this was an order against the BEE Commission to disclose the complaint lodged against it. The company lost that case. And there was an appeal that was also lost by Segalo. The next slide goes into the final example of it, again with a matter where the SCA dismissed an application for leave to appeal. The next slide goes into an unopposed one where the Constitutional Court confirmed the High Court ruling that the Copyright Act is unconstitutional, and the DTIC had not opposed the matter because we had agreed on this, but the process of changing the Act had hit challenges during the NCOP process. So the court judgment was unopposed. Then the next slide were 3 court cases. The first one was where Sasol brought a case against the BEE Commission, and the BEE Commission judgment was effectively overturned, and the Commission lost that case. There was an old matter called Frey Foods Brands, which was an application lodged in 2018 to set aside the DTIC decision to reject an application for an incentive grant, and Phase Foods won that court case. There's cargo carriers who brought a court case against the BEE Commission around fronting practices, and this was dismissed by both the High Court. The application for leave to appeal by the BEE Commission was dismissed by the High Court and the SCA, so the Commission lost that case. The next slide is just really something that Parliament would be very familiar with. 12 briefings to the portfolio and select committees. They covered many different areas from NLC to trade negotiations, national credit matters, Industrial Development Corporation, SABS updates. Next slide deals with international trade and investment engagements. Next slide goes into the first example of the Uganda state visit on 27 to 28 February. We provide a lot of information, opportunities that were identified, what we export to Uganda, which is fruit and nuts, cereals, beverages, live animals, and what we import from Uganda, which is coffee and tea, spices, tubers, tobacco, and cocoa. The next slide then provides a little bit of visual of the president and the 2 presidents. Then slide 125 is the Tanzania state visit. This took place in Pretoria, and we also had the business forum was part of the state visit, and we give an indication of what we buy from Tanzania: coffee, tea, t-shirts, ceramics, and avocados, and what we export to Tanzania, which is products are made of iron, vehicles like bakkies, bars and rods, wine, and explosives. And we go into a little bit of detail on that slide. The slide that's up now is just pictures from the state visit as well as the business forum and the agreement we signed with Tanzania. The next slide is the Belgium Business Forum. This was hosted at the CSIR on the occasion of the state visit by the Belgium heads of state. They still have royalty as their head of state. So when the royalty visited, we decided to link that with a business engagement. And this was held at the CSIR. And we had quite a discussion. There also was a number of side events, like there was a visit by the royal couple to Afrigen, which is a South African company that is in vaccine manufacturing, and it's supported by the IDC. And it was really quite a good showcase of the facilities. The next slide just provides some pictures of the various events that were held. And the Belgium bilateral meeting what we import from Belgium, what we export to Belgium. We export motor vehicles, sulfate, diamonds, blood, waste scrap, and certain kinds of industrial alcohols. And we import oils and insecticides and components and copper wires and so on. The next slide goes into the UAE Ministerial Business Forums. And this was when my counterpart, Minister Al-Zayudi, visited South Africa. And we both witnessed the signing of a power purchasing agreement by a company, Greenco Power. They're an energy trader. They're part of the Southern Africa Power Pool. And the power purchase agreement is for an energy offtake for 85 megawatts solar plant to be located in Northwest. And they're starting construction in the third quarter this year, and they will begin to deliver power into the national grid in early 2025. There were a number of other bilateral engagements, the Joint Economic Commission with Switzerland, the Philippines Bilateral Forum, and the meeting that Minister Pandor had with the Russian Intergovernmental Committee. The next slide is the multilateral engagements. Here it's the meeting of the AFCFTA Council of Ministers held in Botswana, and some of the work that had been done there. The next slide was on the African Union Summit, where we took the trade deal that we had worked hard on and put it forward, and a number of measures were agreed at the summit, including protocols on competition policy and intellectual property, and a number of bilateral meetings were held with counterparts. The next slide is the World Economic Forum that was attended in this quarter. We hosted the South Africa Country Dialogue session with 100 global and South African CEOs. We had bilateral meetings with ministers from Saudi Arabia, Mozambique, United States, and the UAE. We had private sector meetings, among others, with Walmart, DP World, Lulu, Coca-Cola, Aqua, and Jetro. And we also held a WTO ministerial meeting in Davos. The next slide is just a picture of the trade ministers from different countries who were part of the meeting, and one of the ratifications that was deposited with the Director General by one of the countries. The Mining Indaba was held in South Africa, and we had bilateral meetings with the United States, on AGOA, on critical mineral partnerships, and with Japan on the Japan Business Forum, and addressing challenges with visas. We met with Citibank and Zijin Mining, who is investing significant sums of money in the Nkwe platinum mine in Limpopo. The next slide is really just concluding remarks, where the concluding remarks is really just to say that it's been a busy quarter, although it coincided with part of the holiday period, and it wrapped up 12 extraordinarily busy months for the department as the economy began to recover more and more from COVID. So many of the things that for a 2-year period were put on hold are now beginning to be implemented, and it puts an enormous pressure on us to keep up with this. I'm going to ask DG Malebo Mabichi Thompson just to take the committee through briefly through the slide on the performance, and then I'm going to ask the Irene to take us through the financials. DG, over to you.
Have a well-deserved sip of water, Minister.
Thank you. I'm having some rooibos tea with South African honey.
Excellent.
I don't know if the DG is struggling to get online. If so, then I'll just quickly run through the overall
No, she
performance.
is online.
Okay,
She's
DG,
in the
over to
meeting.
you.
DG, please unmute. Okay, it could be the chair's connectivity challenges, Minister.
Okay, let me quickly run through it while DG tries to sort it out. So the slide 140 just gives an overview of the achievements of the department against target. There were 151 planned annual targets, 147 targets were achieved, 4 targets were not achieved. And then we break it down into each of the programs. I can see the DG is on now. Let me defer to the DG. DG, would you like to take over from here?
Thank you, Minister. Just struggling there with the unmute button. I apologize to Minister and the Chair, and good morning to members. Chair, as Minister was indicating, we had 151 planned annual targets, of which we achieved 147 targets, and we have 4 targets that we did not achieve. The areas where we did not record achievement were largely the program dealing with trade, where certain of the areas where we thought we would have advanced quickly, we didn't advance in line with our plan, and there was that as an issue that led us to our underachievement. And then, of course, there were 2 areas in administration that we also were lagging behind on, which we also had to resolve. None of these were such major areas that they would have derailed the achievement, the broad achievement of the department. In most instances, we're dealing with procurement issues that the procurement process was much slower than we would have anticipated. And then in other areas, it's just negotiations that went a little bit too complex and complicated than what we were anticipating, particularly on some of the legislations that we are bringing up to Parliament in this financial year to look at. And then there was one area where we had delayed an output, and mainly because we still also have to finalize our engagements with National Treasury in order to secure funding so that we can go to the market and be able to communicate a very clear message about how we are taking that work program forward. I think in short, that would be how I would characterize the areas where we did not achieve. But as the pie chart shows, that 97% of the outputs that we had set ourselves, we've achieved. Thanks.
Thank you very much, DG. Can I also then, Chair, through you, invite the CFO, Irene Ramafola, to take us briefly through the financial performance.
Thank you very much, Minister. Good morning. Good morning, honorable members. The first slide, we had an original budget of 10.85. That budget was increased through self-financing by an amount of 19.87 million, which resulted in an adjusted budget of 10.87. We then further had an additional funding received from National Treasury for us to be able to effect the cost of living adjustments during that financial year, the financial year under review of 34.37 million. And then the overall revised adjusted budget was then sitting at 10.91 billion when we closed the financial year. The self-financing came from the voluntary rebuild program settlement, better known as the Terisano Fund. And then the other one was rental payable by our department's agencies and from the small business department. We as a department also reallocated an amount of about 314 million from our baseline towards incentives programs. This was for services sectors development and manufacturing programs. Next slide, please. Chair and honorable members, I think you will be happy to note that as a department, from the adjusted budget that we had of 10.91 billion, we were able to spend an amount of 98.9%, which essentially comes to about 99% of the budget as a department. And then I will just go in terms of the split. When you look at the spending, 10.8 billion of that, it was comprised of 5.2, which was for business incentives. And then there's an amount of 2 billion, which was transferred to our public entities. So these are agencies. And then we also disbursed to external programs at the IDC and at the CSIR. There was an amount of 1.7 billion. Also, we have some non-profit organization transfer payments that we make. That amount was about 194 million. And then our in-house operational cost was at 1.6 billion. So the pictorial that you see on your right-hand side just shows the picture in terms of how the monies are split between the various spending within the department. And then the next slide. Next slide, Chair. We look at the spending split based on the various programs, and then we look at it in terms of the economic classification chairperson. As of the financial year under review, we still had 10 programs, and then our budget that was still available was just 1%, about 1%. And then in terms of economic classification, I think the COE, we did have a bit of saving of about the amount there was 3.226. It was mainly also due to the fact that we got that additional funding to effect the cost of living adjustments, chairperson. Minister, through you, I wouldn't want to go a lot into the detail on this particular slide, but you'll see that the programs have actually been able to be spent as they were meant to. I think the one part where we had a bigger percentage in terms of underspending was just on program 8. However, I think that is being sorted out. It was mainly because of some of the one-stop shop, provincial one-stop shops, which we're still in progress. Minister, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, DG, to you and to CFO on the reports. Chairperson, that wraps up the presentation on Q4, the last quarter of the past financial year. And thank you for the opportunity given to the department to account for its work. May I hand back, Chairperson, to you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you for the very comprehensive report. We appreciate the detail, especially your focus on matters of concern raised by members in the previous reports, such as skills development. Members, the floor is open. Can I see your hands for interaction with the report? Members? Seems there is no comments from members.
Chair, Mr. Monakedi, Mr. Mboyani, Chair.
Okay, there we go. Honorable Monakedi.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank the Minister and his team for the elaborate and comprehensive report that they have presented. And I must also acknowledge the sterling work they are doing in promoting industrialization and transformation in the South African economy. With this report, it's clear that indeed we're getting somewhere in terms of bettering the lives of our people. I am also very impressed that the department goes out of its way to ensure that almost all the provinces are covered regarding the programs that they are implemented, so that no province feels left out. So I'm happy with that. I also just want to say that on investments, in the past, when reports were being sort of presented, at times there was no link between pledges or investments attracted and the number of jobs created. But I see that in today's report, they've gone at length to ensure that there is that linkage, that yes, they see so much that has been attracted in the form of investment or trade, and so many jobs created. I think if we can make sure that going forward, our reports are always in that fashion, so that we can be able to track and assess whether there is impact out there in terms of jobs created for our people. So I'm happy that I think we're getting there. So I'm just saying, let's make sure that we keep to that going forward. On measures, if the Minister and his team can just once again indicate as to whether these measures, as they are being approved by the Competition Commission and what have you, indicate whether there are no jobs being lost, especially with regard to the measures that they have just reported. Are we sure, 100% sure that there are no jobs that have been lost? I do understand, I think they've reported in terms of worker, the benefit in terms of workers being able to benefit from the company that is being established. But if they could just talk to the issue of job losses, if there is any. With regard to grey listing, I just want to check as to whether the department already is working on the necessary measures that are needed to take us out of this grey listing. Have they identified those measures? And also, how far are they in ensuring that the same measures are now being implemented? And the last one is with regard to the few areas where they have not been able to reach or achieve the targets. And I must also welcome the good performance in terms of making sure that the targets that have been set have been achieved, I think it's 97%, yes. So I just want to check those that they have not been able to achieve. And they've indicated here that I think in the main, the reason was with regard to procurement processes or issues. Have they dealt with going forward those issues so that in the next financial year, in the next quarters, we no longer have the same challenges that made them not to achieve those other targets? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Monakedi. Honorable Mbiyani.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, for the opportunity. Chair, let me also welcome the presentation. It was very much elaborate in terms of clarifying some of the programs that are looked after by the department. Chair, I just wanted to check in terms of as we know that the government is a major procurer of goods and services. Are we able to manage in terms of the triple BEE? Because we have been confronted with the issues of fronting and also any consequence management around it. And what is the view of the department and the minister in terms of the triple BEE charter around Companies Act, also the empowerment so that the triple BEE can be able to enforce and be able to prosecute around the fronting. We also like to check in terms of the comprehensive report of Black industrialists, in terms of the new procurement bill that is coming. Chair, the second last is we welcome the collaboration and the merger by the Mediclinic so that our government hospitality and also the Department of Health is be able to get trainings and also the profit sharing schemes. Chair, I just wanted to check in terms of the regulations, whether do we have the implementation program of the National Credit Amendment Act to have program, and is that program being budgeted for so that we are able to see the National Credit Amendment Act implementation? Maybe on the issues of targets that were not achieved, I'm covered by Honorable Monakedi on that one. For me, it's just to check in terms of what are the plans in terms of achieving the industrial competitiveness and also the growth, because it's a key mandate of the department around the trade policy as well. The last one, Chair, I want to check the linking of government programs with universities around the industrialization and also transformation. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mbiyani. Honorable Thring.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, let me also firstly appreciate the presentation by the Minister and the different members who have presented. We appreciate the detailed presentation. My first question, Chair, is around jobs created. And while we appreciate the statistics and the figures that the Minister has presented in terms of jobs created in the different sectors, I think I've said this before, and it bears repeating. It pales, however, in comparison to the broad unemployment figure of some 32%. That's on the narrow definition of unemployment, and on the expanded definition, it's in excess of 40 to 50%, with youth unemployment obviously much higher at about 60 to 70%. So the challenge, Chair, is how do we, and I understand that, you know, one department is not necessarily responsible for for tackling the problem or the challenge of unemployment, but what interministerial interventions are there? So while trade and industry is looking at upskilling and reskilling and so on, but what interministerial interventions are there to upskill, reskill, and particularly to take those members of our population that are unemployable? They are not able to get, there are jobs out there, but we can't take our South Africans because they don't have the necessary qualifications and so on. And in this case, there's two scenarios that I want to speak to. It is said, for example, that there are about 160,000, 170,000 plumbers in South Africa, but only 30,000 of them are registered and actually have the proper qualifications. So here, for example, is a challenge that we have within the plumbing sector. And I suppose one could take that to mechanical engineering. One could take that to electrical, your electricians and bricklayers and so on and so on. So what are the interventions to take these particular individuals and actually upskill them? So that's just the plumbing sector as an example. But the other is also your expanded public works program. And this is a program within your public works entity, public works and department. So there's a huge expanded public works program where people are given, in a sense, piece jobs. But if there is some kind of intention, an intentional plan to take those particular individuals who are maybe employed for 3 to 6 months in the year and then wait again for another program. But if there's an intentional program to upskill these particular individuals, it then actually deals with the skills deficit and also the unemployment challenge that we have in South Africa. So my first question is around the unemployment and the interministerial interventions. My second is just with a general question to the Minister with regards to our study tour to South Korea and some of the interventions that we've obviously seen that worked for South Korea, that when the Minister receives the report, what kind of reciprocation is there going to be in terms of best practice, so that we could actually see how we could actually benefit, that's our SEZs and industrial zones, how we can benefit from what we've learned in South Korea. And then lastly, Chair, it's on the aspect again of beneficiation. And I still believe that we still have a long way to go. We are one of the largest exporters of raw materials with very little beneficiation. And I do think that beneficiation can be a catalyst to the challenges of unemployment that South Africa currently has, if we take it to the next level. And yes, the Minister has reported on some of the beneficiation projects that we've had, particularly with regards to batteries and platinum and your catalytic converters and so on. But I still believe that it's minuscule compared to what we are able to achieve in terms of our mineral deposits and what we export to particularly first world countries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Singh. Honourable Malamacha.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. Through you, Chairperson, let me also follow suit and welcome a detailed report with some proven evidence on the ground that proves that it is not report on paper, it is also report on the ground. That has been testified, especially with a huge contribution on the GDP, where we witnessed the growth of 0.4 growth. Minister, on that, the contribution is highly appreciated. Is the department having further plans to ensure that we time and again be far away from the technical recessions, as the department has contributed heavily to ensure that technical recession does not find our economy? And we want to thank the department on that. Chairperson, it will be of denying the South Africans to know the truth if we don't take this presentation and in a grammar, we dramatize it to the people of South Africa to show how it has impacted the life of the likes of a widow in Nkwankwa in a form of Akani Paint Pty. And if we don't appreciate the work, the good work done by the minister and the team there, we will be not doing justice. Minister, from the very same set, example, that the department having another plans to ensure that come the other quarter, with the little resources that you are allocated to, having intention to expand these kind of programs, where it is no longer like before, where widows can take their kids to school. The question of Akani is a good story to tell. Chairperson, I'm not staying far away from Heineken. I'm just across R59. The merger that has been presented here, I see it on daily basis. Everything that has been said, including the reducing of import of finished products, it is here, it's happening. Import of barley, it is here, it's happening. Where it's reduced, then the locals are to be in. Minister, does the department having any other plans to ensure that where, in particular, as you have been requested to intervene and came with this plan that has rescued the country and the neighboring state in the form of Namibia in this measure, have other plans to measure other bigger institutes in state of job declining and job losses? Then the last one, Comrade Chairperson, it's one of the good things that if we don't say it, it's also a problem. This SEZ, the Tshwane one has become a classical one to the entire South Africa, and now it can compete with other international SEZ. Does the department have another one to follow exactly as the Tshwane one, show to so consistent in the rollout of what we are intending to say, where possible, even in the rural area, instead of bringing people to the cities only as if we care about the city only, it can also be an example to that. Chairperson, I think the issue of work of jobs is a process. I mean, it's a work. It's in process. We have seen the numbers that telling stories themselves. If you are to go to the master plan, especially slide number 89, where it deals with the poultry, those figures in the state can tell you that other master plans, the targets were met, and we really need to appreciate, as other colleagues have indicated, that where the targets are not met, I don't need to necessarily repeat that, but we are saying, can the department take us in confidence that it will be done for the good? Thank you so much, Chairperson. We really appreciate the report.
Thank you very much, Honorable Malamacha. I see welcome to the meeting, Honorable Msani. You may proceed with your question to the Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just have a few questions to the Minister. One would be with regards to the recent threats that we are seeing from the United States, that they are looking into moving South Africa from hosting the AGOA forum that is due to take place in 2023 in South Africa, due to our support for Russia in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. What is the Minister's thoughts with this regard? And is it not then a threat from the United States of America using a trade agreement that should be beneficial for both states and also respecting the sovereignty of the countries that are members or are co-signed to the agreement? My second one, Chair, it's also with regards to the BRICS. We note that there are some companies which are receiving funding from the New Development Bank. I don't know if the minister would know offhand of how many of those companies that actually received loans from this BRICS Bank are privately and Black owned, and maybe in which sectors, and have they been able to repay the loans, and how much employment have they created in assisting with the unemployment that South Africa is currently facing? And also with regards to the program of infrastructure development of Africa, do we have any South African countries that are participating in any form of infrastructure development in the African continent, especially noting with regards to what happened during the COVID-19, where shipment and trucks between African states were stuck in border gates for quite a long time, and it saw fresh produce ending up being spoiled. The last one, Chair, would be regarding the role that the DTIC might be playing with regards to in the interministerial of analyzing and assessing the AU protocol for free movement of people. Because I did a few research and found out that it's the Home Affairs, DTIC, International Relations, quite a number of ministerials in the SADC are looking into getting SADC to accede to the AU protocol of free movement of people in order to, apart from, we all know that we no longer use visas as SADC amongst SADC states when we travel, but we need to accede to the free movement of people protocol, which would then build a easier trade in assisting the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, like it's already been done with the one-stop border. So I don't know if DTIC is a participant, and what input have they put through in those negotiations with regarding to the acceding to the AU protocol of free movement of people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Msani. Minister, over to you for responses.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And first, let me thank the honourable members for the thoughtful questions and also for the warm comments. Honourable Monakedi, we will maintain the link between investments and jobs created. On the merger matters, by and large, our law is quite unusual by global standards in that typically in many economies across the world, a merger is motivated by the opportunities to cut costs by bringing synergies and in that way to improve company performance. And so competition law across the world don't generally deal with employment matters. Some do, but generally it's not the pattern. When Parliament passed the Competition Act, it set a broader framework on competition that looked, among others, at impact on employment. So there are not many jobs that are lost during mergers. When a merger involves what is called a failing firm, where a company is going down and someone else buys the company, then in those instances, the competition authorities may be less focused on the number of retrenchments and more focused on trying to save the company from completely collapsing. So they may, in that case, permit a merger without very stringent employment conditions. But that's few and far between. Most of the mergers do have very strong job protection measures. And in fact, we have reported back to the Committee on this matter. And honorable members will see on one of the slides dealing with jobs, I think it's slide number 45, we provide information there that there's 178,000 workers covered by competition measures where the company is not entitled to reduce the aggregate employment in the business. And so if you have two CFOs, when you merge two businesses, you obviously can't, in the long term, have the two CFOs. So if you change the one CFO, you may promote the CFO to some very other senior position, or if that CFO leaves, you've got to then employ someone else at a lower level. In a few of the agreements, we have very specific retrenchment clauses. So in the South African context, given our high unemployment, that's been a big focus. On the grey listing, there will be a presentation that will come up shortly in this meeting. On the targets that have not been met, the 3 targets, a few members asked that question. And yes, those targets have been included in the new APP. Honorable Mbuyani, on government as a major procurer, are we concerned about fronting? It remains something that we must be vigilant on. And as we strengthen the BEE Commission, it will be able to flush out examples of fronting. And there may be a role that there is for better regulation, but it's also about better enforcement, because often the problem is not so much regulation, but enforcement. On the new procurement bill, this will be introduced to Parliament. And of course, the DTIC, and I'm sure this committee will have an interest in the matter. And I'm sure that the committee responsible for this will take into account all the concerns that honourable members may have. Inside Cabinet, we've worked with the National Treasury to ensure that the bill does include provisions relating to transformation. On the National Credit Amendment Act implementation, that is with our agency, and I will get an update on how far they are with that. On government programs with universities on industrialization, the early stage of industrialization is innovation. That's when you get new ideas, new ways of doing things that can help to strengthen either new product development, so you invent something new, or alternatively, you've got a better process to do something that is currently on the market. Now, in this report, we did indicate our work with the CSIR and our work in Northwest, and Deputy Minister Majola had attended the one symposium. I will, in one of the future annual quarterly reports, try to pull together a little bit more on our partnerships with different institutions on industrialization. But I can say now already that sometimes through these merger conditions, we get the companies concerned to make funding available to universities. We did that with PepsiCo, and we did that some collaboration between Mediclinic and South African universities. Honorable Tring raised the question of the size of the employment challenge, and Honorable Tring, that is the most significant number that we're focusing on. And you've asked the question around skills development and what are we doing at the interministerial committee? Because obviously what the DTIC can do is relatively limited, and it needs an all-of-government approach. So there is a Human Resource Development Council that is chaired by the Deputy President, and on which a number of ministers, including our ministry, sits. And that provides an opportunity to see how we can coordinate our efforts across the different parts of government to promote skills development. In addition to that, there's also work that we do on the areas that impact on job numbers. A good example is energy. We have an energy IMC, because in order to reduce the joblessness number. You need skills development that's on the supply side of the labor market. But you also need to be able to have an economy that's growing so that it absorbs more young people into employment. And the energy challenges have certainly dampened our growth. While we've avoided going into recession, at the same time, we do recognize that it has had a challenging impact on growth, and for that reason, so much of our effort now is on energy. The other programs, for example, the work that Minister Didiza does on the Cannabis Master Plan, which Deputy Minister Gina represents the DTIC on that, which is intended to unlock opportunities that will involve large numbers of people. On the EPWP, Honorable Tring makes the point, which is a good point, that these programs must also see how they can upskill people. And what we've done in our equivalent of the EPWP, which is the Special Employment Program or Fund that the IDC runs, is very often to take people with skills, formal skills as in things that they've learned at university, but they don't have that first opportunity to utilize that skill and to learn more in a practical work setting, so they can't get their final qualification. And we've given a few examples in today's presentation of what we've done with young interns, how the industrial programs that we've run and the skills program we've run have given people their first opportunity to work, and through that improve their skill. Because the skills development has to be this combination of workplace exposure and classroom or training center learning. And that's what we're focusing quite a lot on now. Honorable Tring, I think South Korea offers some fascinating lessons and examples. Their constitution and history, of course, was very different from the point of view that they had in the early days of the industrialization drive. They had a military government who brooked no opposition, who took quite robust measures to get Korean businesses to work within the national planning framework that they had. And in addition to that, they had a very significant access to the US market as part of, that was the period of the Cold War. It had just been the period around the Korean War. And so they had access on extremely preferential terms to the world's biggest consumer market at the time. But nonetheless, I think some of the lessons around Korea is the enormous focus they bring. They plan well. They don't plan too many things, and they execute with enormous attention to detail and consequence management. And so if you don't achieve what is part of your the commitments on you as an employee or on you as a manager, they do have very strong, or they had very strong consequent management in place. The other important lesson is the focus on innovation, that they've invested very heavily in building innovative companies. So they've taken a society that was rural and poor and turned it into one where some of the most advanced manufacturing in the world is now taking place through, for example, companies like Samsung and others. So I think that there's a lot that can be learned, and there's a lot of scope for strengthening the collaboration there. On beneficiation, one of our biggest challenges on beneficiation is, of course, energy. But in addition to that is the price of raw materials. And more countries have now explored, particularly with critical minerals, what measures they need to put in place that require more local production of products. In our case, it would need to be a very strong partnership with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, because they would have the levers available, the legal levers available to deal with this matter. And it is one, of course, that the mining industry is not keen on at all. But if we want to have transformative programs, in other words, scale up what we do, we can learn from the experience of others. Chile has recently announced a whole new approach to the processing of lithium. Some countries on our neighbors are beginning to look at this, how we can use our minerals, African minerals, more cleverly to promote African development. Indonesia has been a leader in the field where they've used their nickel resources to build a stainless steel industry. But at the end of the day, this does require taking unpopular and quite tough decisions, because when you do these things, then you do disturb, obviously, the commercial interests in an economy. Honorable Malamecha has asked if the department is doing what it can to try to contribute to efforts to avoid the recession. I think our single biggest immediate challenge is the matter of energy. If we can crack that one, then we've got so much interest in the economy at the moment, so many investors that are keen to expand, and so many commitments that people are ready to make if there is a secure supply of energy, that I think it's right what government is doing now, which is to focus on energy and transport logistics. The president recently met with a number of business people to work on a deeper partnership where we get much greater coordination to try to grow the economy and see if we can strengthen the output of sectors that are energy dependent. On the need to tell the story of ordinary South Africans, in the past, the DTIC programs were very much about just impersonal, anonymous numbers. Now, numbers are important because they give you a sense of scale, but what we've started to do in the past financial year, and we're going to be speeding it up in the new financial year, is to tell the stories of ordinary South Africans. And they are very interesting stories. The presentation today, I've given a few of them. There are even more significant and moving stories that we hope we'll be able to tell in future. On the matter around the Heineken merger and the other big mergers, this is, of course, at the moment, at any given point, we have companies deciding whether to buy other companies. That's outside of government's influence. Once a company has put its sight on another company, it could be a competitor, in which case there are more operations. It could be an investor who wants to get into a new area. Once that merger process is triggered, then we try to make sure we bring in the public interest matter. On the SEZs and are there other areas that we're trying to get this really significant SEZ example? At the moment, we're working with the Northern Cape around the Namakwa SEZ, and we will be gazetting fairly shortly the call for public comments. There's already been quite a lot of public consultation in the Northern Cape. We wanted to do one more drive and see if we can lift up that SEZ proposal. Honorable Msani raised the question around the AGOA matter and the AGOA forum. I dealt quite substantially with the matter of AGOA during the oral parliamentary session, where I noted that about 18% of our exports, almost 20% of our exports to the United States go through one of two preferences, either AGOA or the generalized system of preferences. And it's in South Africa's interest to try to retain access to those facilities because it helps us with job creation. While it's true that the bulk of our products go through World Trade Organization rules, and they're not affected by any of the decisions of an individual country, the United States unusually has what is called a unilateral trade measure. This is not an agreement. AGOA is not an agreement. It's a trade measure adopted by the US Congress. They've decided that they will give countries on the African continent preferential access, and it's subject to certain conditions. One of it is sub-Saharan Africa, and the other is that there's a range of requirements that the United States would apply relating to how they view the economics and politics in a given country. But also, once a country is seen to have grown to the point where it no longer needs the access, then they graduate those countries out. They've done that already, excluding some African countries. In the case of the latest one, it's a letter by 4 United States Congress representatives. We will be engaging with the US Congress representatives and hearing them out on their concerns and putting forward South Africa's position. So I want to differentiate between a trade agreement where one party can't act unilaterally, and that would be our World Trade Organization agreements, for example, or economic partnership agreements that we have with the EU and the UK, where both parties have put on paper what are the terms of the trading relationship. Just over 80% of our trade with the United States is covered by those. Just under 20% is covered by a preferential trade access, unilaterally granted. In other words, it's not negotiated with African countries. And we do want to retain access to AGOA because it does help South African exporters to increase the level of exports to the United States. On BRICS and the matter of the New Development Bank, most of the loans from the BRICS New Development Bank is loans for infrastructure, because it's largely been developed as an infrastructure bank. So that those facilities are most often provided to state-owned companies or utilities. I will get this falls under the Minister of Finance, but I will try to see if we're able to get some information on the private sector counterparts. But I would imagine that most of the loans would be for public entities or for projects that are public infrastructure projects, even if they are private players. On the infrastructure on the African continent, that's quite an important area that we must look at. And so the work that is done by a number of ministers on this area, for example, on road transport, on the border posts. If you go to Limpopo in Messina, you'll see the enormous number of trucks coming through on the highway to Beitbridge, and that puts pressure on the road itself. You'll see the quality of the road in parts of the N1 to Messina. It also puts strain on the infrastructure at the border post. So there's been work on that. And while that's our main border post, it's not only there, it's also in other parts of the crossing. So I think this is an important area. I would like to draw attention on slide 34. We dealt with the fact that the IDC has made about 5.2 billion rand available for projects in other African countries. Some of these are infrastructure-related projects, and they help to unlock economic opportunities for fellow African countries. And the more Africa grows, the more South Africa benefits. So it's the thing about being part of the continent is growth in one part of the continent has very significant positive spillover effects to other parts. So, for example, if Nigeria grows very fast, then South African consumer products are sold in Nigeria. South African banks and retailers have more of an opportunity in Nigeria, and South African equipment in mining, in oil, and so on are bought by Nigeria. So we see it as important to support the wider African Growth Initiative. On the matter of protocol on free movement of people, that falls under the championship of other ministries, including the Minister of Home Affairs. DTIC deals with the movement of goods and capital, so that we are able to ensure that that flows freely. And my colleagues deal with the wider issues around the protocol on free movement of people. Now, many more countries have ratified the protocols on the free movement of goods. At last count, we had something like 51 countries who had signed on it. And if my memory serves me now, something of the order of, I think it's about 47 or so countries that have ratified that. There are a number of countries that are still hesitant on the protocol and the free movement of people. And so there's ongoing discussions on those matters. And of course, the DTIC would be consulted from time to time. But this is not an area that we're driving inside the executive. It's driven principally by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Chairperson, I've covered what I think are the various questions. I'd like to appreciate the positive comments and the useful suggestions that have been made by all members, Honorable Monakedi, Honorable Mbuyani, Honorable Tring, Honorable Malemecha, and Honorable Msani. It's really been a good session for us. And I want to end off with the observation made by Honorable Malemecha, which is that as South Africans, we must tell our story. There are many, many challenges that we face as South Africans. Stories that are bad news, stories that are instances of challenges in the economy and at community level. But if we are to drive a significant improvement in all of this, it must be by also not talking ourselves into a depression. It's by being able to see the strengths, the resilience of our people, of systems that work. Not everything is broken, and to then fix that which is broken, to recognize the problems that there are, and to put real effort into addressing and resolving those problems. And time is not with us. There's a whole generation of young people who are looking for opportunity in the economy. And it's the responsibility of all of us to make sure that those young people, our children, our young people are able to operate, to live, to be citizens in an economy that is growing, in a society that is filled with optimism about the future. And many of these stories that come out when we engage with people, when we meet South Africans at work, are inspiring stories. Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Minister. Yes, indeed. Sorry. Yes, indeed. It's about optimism about the future. It's about resilience. It's about fixing what is broken. It is all our responsibility. Thank you very much, Minister. In the interest of time, we're just going to have a 5-minute body break, and then we'll go into our next agenda item. Thank you very much. We'll resume our deliberations at 11, I think at 12 on the dot. Let's make it 8 minutes. Thank you. So we will now receive a brief on the response to the recent grey listing of South Africa by FATF, as well as the progress made in relations to the implementation of the recommendations emanating from the state capture report. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And I'm going to introduce the report, which we have in the form of a PowerPoint presentation. I'm also accompanied not only by the department representatives, but by Advocate Rory Vollo, who is the CIPC Commissioner, who will also be available for any of the questions. So, Chairperson, the briefing covers the two parts that I've indicated. If we go to the first slide, we thought we should give some background to this. In 1989, the Financial Action Task Force, called FATF, was founded. It was done at the initiative of the group of 7 countries, the G7. And the intention was to develop policies to combat money laundering. At the time, many governments were concerned that a very sophisticated system of money laundering was enabling the drug trade. In addition to that, people were laundering money to avoid their tax obligations. And money laundering is basically where you hide the true source of your money, you put it through a system that's supposed to clean it up, and then it appears in a legitimate bank account. That's where the word laundering comes from. That mandate was later expanded to look at policies to combat terrorism financing. FATF now has close to 40 countries as members. Where a country is not in compliance with the standards that FATF has set, it may be blacklisted, which will then see financial institutions shift financial resources and services away from such a blacklisted country. South Africa was subject to a review, all FATF members are subject to a review of our laws and our processes, and FATF identified a number of deficiencies, and they made some recommendations to address these. Based on this, Cabinet had requested an interdepartmental committee on anti-money laundering and the countering of terrorism finance to be set up. The committee comprised National Treasury, but a number of other government departments and enforcement agencies, and they included the DTIC, Social Development, Justice, Constitutional Development, the CIPC, and SARS. The object of that committee was to coordinate the action and make recommendations to ensure that South Africa addresses the concerns that our financial systems had some gaps in it, that someone who wants to launder money can find a way to do so. The standards are also aimed at helping the authorities go after money that is the proceeds of crime, like drug dealing, funding of terrorism activities, and human trafficking. FATF recommended actions in the form of 11 immediate outcomes. One area that they identified focused on the laws dealing with disclosing who is the true owner of assets. So the phrase that's used is the beneficial owner of assets. So who ultimately derives the benefit from an asset? Because you can hide the asset with a series of legal entities that where your ownership is not known, but the ultimate owner of each of these legal entities may be an individual that is trying to hide the proceeds of drug money, as an example. Now, where the DTIC comes in is that in relation to shares in listed companies, this falls within the regulatory purview of the Companies Act. Now, before the FATF report was finally submitted, the DTIC had already initiated the process of review of the Companies Act, which led to amendments being proposed in 3 areas. The first dealt with ease of doing business. The second one, the disclosure of information on the true owner of shares in a company. And the third, on disclosure of information on income differentials within a company. A draft bill was gazetted for public comment in 2021. In 2022, Cabinet decided that given the number of different laws across many different departments that are affected by the FATF recommendations, it was necessary to do an omnibus bill. An omnibus bill can be done through what is called a general laws amendment bill. What that does, in that one bill, it amends many other acts of parliament. And this was then prepared by National Treasury in consultation with the different departments. It went through cabinet. It was submitted to parliament and tabled by the speaker, and it was eventually approved by parliament. And that General Laws Amendment Act made changes to our Companies Act. However, while we were implementing all of this, on the 24th of February this year, South Africa was placed on a list of countries where enhanced monitoring is required. Now, what FATF talks about as enhanced monitoring has become known as grey listing. It's a first step that may result in blacklisting if it's not addressed. The General Laws Anti-Money Laundering and Combating of Terrorism Financing Amendment Act of 2022 was assented into law in December 2022. It amends the Companies Act on matters relating to the definition of beneficial owner and the requirement to compile and maintain a register of who are the beneficial owners. The registers will be accessible to law enforcement agencies when doing investigations relating to money laundering. The CIPC is the regulatory entity in the DTIC that will be responsible for enforcing that part of the law. And we make the point that there are other departments also affected, and we list a number of them there: National Treasury, Department of Justice, and so on. The Act aims to strengthen South Africa's system of anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism, but it will also help us in strengthening the fight against corruption, fraud, and terrorism, and assist South Africa in meeting the international standards set by FATF. In the next slide, we note that the concerns addressed by the changes to the law goes to two key issues. The first is ensuring that competent authorities have timely access to accurate and up-to-date ownership information, not just on who is the nominal owner of a share, but who is the true owner of the share. And secondly, it addresses the application of sanctions for breaches or violations by legal persons to beneficial ownership obligations. A legal person is different to a natural person in that a firm, a company, can also be a legal person in the eyes of the law. In line with the commitments made to FATF and the commitment as South Africa to exit early from increased monitoring or grey listing, we recognize we were going to be grey listed, but we want to keep the period of grey listing as short as possible. The CIPC is now implementing different phases of a beneficial ownership register. And the data on the beneficial ownership registers for all entity types where ownership of a person is 5% or more. And it's an obligation on the company to collect that information, and it's an obligation on the CIPC to maintain a register, which allows law enforcement and prosecuting authorities to take these matters up in prosecution through the country's courts. The next slide then brings us up to date with the actions we've recently taken. On the 24th of May this year, I published regulations to require companies to disclose the true owners of shares as part of strengthening South Africa's anti-corruption and money laundering legal framework. The regulations were developed by a joint team from different government departments, and it follows a process of public consultation. The regulations provide for a beneficial ownership register to be kept by companies and the CIPC, and it will be available for use by law enforcement agencies. The publishing of the regulations follow the process that was initiated with the reforms to the Companies Act that we did in that we launched in October 2021 with the gazetting. Certain provisions of the Companies Act were amended, of course, as I've said, with the General Law Amendment Act. This is the first phase in a wider reform to introduce greater transparency in beneficial ownership and interests held by natural persons in companies. We're looking at further changes as part of amendments to the Companies Act, and that's being worked on. As a consequence of the promulgation, so what we've done is Parliament passed the law last year. We've moved swiftly. We've published the regulations for public comment, took the public comment into account, published the final regulations. They've now come into effect, and the CIPC is now empowered to collect beneficial ownership information from legal persons, and companies are required to provide this information to the CIPC. The next slide then deals with really the aim of establishing the ownership register is to have a single repository, a single place where you hold all of this information so that law enforcement is expedited. The definition of beneficial owner, as well as further information on the filing and all of this are part of now the implementation plan, and the part of the implementation plan is to publicize what we do. So we've, as a first step of it, if you want to know what is the definition of beneficial owner, you can go to the CIPC website and the e-services platform. The regulations will strengthen the fight against corruption and improve the integrity of South Africa's financial system. In the next slide, we provide a little bit of information on the published guidelines and frequently asked questions that the CIPC has put together. And honorable members are able to go to that website. We also, as in phase 2, looking at MOUs with other registries. For example, the CIPC has identified jurisdictions where particular companies come from and want to then do MOUs with those jurisdictions. There's information sharing with other regulators and law enforcement agencies, and there's plans for listed companies to provide a separate dispensation in relation to companies that are listed. And this is to avoid the duplication of records and ensure that we keep the ease of compliance as simple as possible. The next slide then deals with state capture. So before I go to the state capture, if I can just sum up on the for grey listing, one of the areas that had been identified by FATF was that we needed to have improved laws. That has now been done in 2022. That in order to give effect to that law, earlier this year in May, we've published the regulations. Now it's implementation by the CIPC, collection of data on that matter. May I then, Chairperson, go to the second part, which is dealing with the state capture issues. The first slide of it says that the Zondo Commission recommended that Section 162 of the Companies Act be amended to address what is called a time bar, so that we can permit applications to have directors declared delinquent even after the 2-year period that the current law has in place on good cause shown. So let me unpack that. In our current legal framework, if you as a director have acted delinquently, negligently, you've facilitated or turned a blind eye to instances of corruption and state capture, then you can be declared delinquent. But the law requires that the action be brought within a 2-year period. And the Zondo Commission has made the point that that means that some companies implicated in state capture, the directors may be able to escape delinquency application because of this time bar. So the DTIC has drafted amendments to the Companies Act It's being taken through a cabinet process. We expect that this may be considered during June 2023. We're looking at two options. The first option is to add the amendment to the current review of the company amendment bill. So when that bill comes to Parliament, that it may have this clause in it. The challenge with it is that the Zondo Commission recommendations only came out after we had published the original bill for public consultation. So Parliament would then have to supplement this by giving the public an opportunity to make comments, and we're getting legal advice on that. If the legal advice says that it's going to be a challenge, then we may need to consider this in a separate Companies Act amendment, which would be the next Companies Act legislative review. The next slide really just looks at a matter that the Zondo Commission identified, which is that there are a number of companies implicated in state capture, and the CIPC is engaged with the Department of Public Enterprises, with state-owned companies that fall within the DPE portfolio, and with law enforcement agencies regarding potential delinquency applications for directors in those companies. They've all agreed to a roadmap. They also looked at other actions like reporting directors to professional bodies. And because these companies are the subject of further legal process by DPE, the committee may want to engage DPE on the progress made in these other areas. The State Attorney has been instructed to brief counsel to assist the CIPC in evaluating the merits of specific delinquency applications. Because these themselves may be the subject of legal proceedings, we provide aggregated information, and we believe that where there's a live matter, it would be better for the CIPC not to go into all the details beyond what is in the Zondo Commission report, so that it doesn't provide any ammunition, any basis for implicated individuals to rely on, to try to slip out of the consequences of their actions. In the next slide, we provide some of the aggregated information. The total number of matters that were investigated, the total ones that require no further action because the CIPC has concluded that those companies have complied, some that are now post the compliance notice period, some where compliance notices have to be issued. The next slide just sum up the companies that were identified and where the matter is. So honorable members will see the entity name and registration number, and it will see the status. Where a company satisfactorily provides or replies to the queries that have been put to them, then the matter gets closed. Where a company goes into liquidation, then no further action is taken, although I guess that there may need to be a look at whether those directors should be pursued further. And this is a matter that DPE, as the responsible ministry, would no doubt want to look at. On the next slide, it also indicates one instance where a implicated director resigned from the company and is currently facing criminal charges, and one instance where the Zondo Commission halted investigations and made no finding. So this represents a piece of work by the CIPC to take account of all the companies that were identified in the Zondo Commission report. So the big storyline here is that as regards the matter of changing the law, there are processes underway. As regards the entities implicated, the CIPC is working on this matter and has made a report containing the information on the status of each of those. Chairperson, that wraps up the presentation covering both grey listing and the recommendations emanating from the Zondo Commission. Thank you very much. May I hand back to the Chair?
Thank you very much, Minister. Members of the committee, there is the report on grey listing and the Zondo Commission recommendations. Can I take hands, members? Honourable Monakedi, may proceed.
Chair, thank you very much. My apology that earlier on I was a little ahead of the presentations by the Minister. And in his presentation now on grey listing, he has actually been able to answer my questions and my concerns. And I'm happy that the department has been very responsive with regard to the issues that needed to be attended to as raised by the Financial Action Task Force. So I'm happy with what the Minister has alluded to in his presentation, which answers my questions. On the Zondo Commission, I just want to check on the question of the amendment to Section 162 of the Companies Act, dealing with the time bar, whether the amendment is going to be made to apply retrospectively, so that those cases that the Zondo Commission was able to bring up will be dealt with. Because if it is not going to apply retrospectively, it means obviously, yeah, we can't go back. But if it is made to apply retrospectively, it means the state will be empowered to deal even with those ones. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Not bye yet. The meeting is still on, Honourable Monakedi.
I'm sorry.
Honourable Dr. Ntwani.
Good morning, colleagues. And thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to ask a question. Thank you, Honourable Minister, for the quite detailed report, and we really appreciate you for bringing us on par. Then I just needed a clarity with regard to the beneficial interest register for companies that's going to be established. You indicated that it's law enforcement agencies that would have access to it, and that only directors with 5% of more in a company may have to declare or would be presented on this register. So my question is just clarity, will it only be law enforcement agencies, or would myself or my accountant be able to access those information, the information as well? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honourable Mbuyani.
Chairperson, thank you very much. I think mine is just one around the Companies Act, because here we understand that there was an instance where board of directors are taking decisions around the executive participation. But those that are participating in the process, in the day-to-day running of the institution, they have non-voting shares around that. So I just want to check the clarity whether it has been corrected or amended, and what is the view moving forward, so that this Companies Act is approved by Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I don't see any other hands. So over to you for responses.
Well, thank you very much to the three honourable members for their questions. On Honorable Monakedi's question relating to the amendment, we are looking at both possibilities, Honorable Monakedi. Obviously, for this to be effective, retrospectivity would need to be an element of it, but we are consulting with legal advisors on the matter. In general, our courts prefer that we don't make actions retrospective, but there are unusual circumstances where this may be justified. And so we're looking at an appropriate formulation. And once Cabinet has made a decision on the matter, I can then indicate what which option we've gone for. Honorable Ntwani, on the beneficial ownership register, on the two issues that you've raised, for practical purposes, we did put the threshold because sometimes in particularly large companies, you'd have thousands and thousands of people holding really tiny amount of shares. So that's the purpose of the threshold. In the regulations that have gone out, they are limited to law enforcement agencies. In the wider review of the Companies Act, it was what we had advertised in 2021 was a wider reach with more members of the public being able to scrutinize information on beneficial ownership. That matter is now going through a process inside government. And when the bill is finalized by Cabinet, I will then table that bill in Parliament. And at that point, I would be able to advise whether there would be any change in relation to who may have access to the beneficial ownership register. I have a similar point in response to the interesting question by Honorable Mbuyani, that during this period when we're going through the evaluation and getting Cabinet to consider the content of bills, we don't normally provide that information in order to give Cabinet an opportunity to first consider it. Once it's gone through the Cabinet process, I would then be able to provide all of that information, including to the committee. I would be coming to the committee and taking the committee through the key areas that we've identified for amendments. I hope that that provides a sufficient response for now, Chairperson, knowing that I would then have a second bite at the cherry when we do come to Parliament with the bill. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. So the discussion is ongoing. Thank you very much, Minister. Let's go to our next agenda item, which is the study tour. Now, considering that report today, we will just, sorry, Minister.
Chairperson, if I may ask if I may be excused from this. I do look forward to seeing the report and reading it carefully, but may I be excused from this item on the agenda?
Yes, thank you very much, Minister, for your attendance today and for the extensive presentations that you have shared. It's highly appreciated. Thank you. Go well. Honourable members, so for today, we will not be going through the report. We are just tabling it as a first draft, and we will then ask members who were part of the tour to gaps in the report or anything that we have not captured, and then to make submissions to the PC Secretariat by close of business on Monday, so that we then take your submissions into the report, and then we'll consider it in the third term. Members? I'm not sure if anybody wants to comment on it, but that is my proposal. Okay, let's go to our last agenda item, which is the third quarter program. Committee Secretary.
Thank you, Chairperson. This is the draft third quarter program as flagged on the screen. Chair, we have constituency from the 19th till the 28th of August. Then we have a proposed oversight visit to Free State and possibly Northwest, Chair. Chair, the oversight visit, as I want to stress, is subject to approval by the House Chairperson, Chair. And once we have approval, we will communicate with members regarding that. We're making the assumption that it would be approved, so our program starts on the 5th of September, Chair. We will get a briefing by stakeholders on the progress in implementation of the poultry master plan. We will also consider the first draft of the report of the DTIC's fourth quarter financial and non-financial performance, Chair, and we will probably add the study tour report to the Tuesday the 5th as well, Chair. Then Wednesday the 6th, Chair, we will have a follow-up engagement with the leader and the debt and firms visited during the February visit to Limpopo. And we will formally consider both reports that we looked at on the 5th of September. Then on the 12th of September, Chair, we will have an update from the SIU on the NLC's investigation. On the 13th of September, we will get a briefing by the DTIC, NEF, and IDC on support for Black industries, including underdeveloped provinces, with regard to renewable energy, manufacturing, and agro-processing. On Tuesday, the 19th of September, we will be briefed by stakeholders on progress with regard to the implementation of the Sugar Value Chain Master Plan, and we'll consider the first draft of the oversight report. And Wednesday, the 20th, Chair, we'll get a briefing by the NLC on its first quarter financial and non-financial performance report, as well as from SABS on their first quarter financial and non-financial performance report. We'll formally consider the oversight report and the fourth quarter report. And the committee will break for constituency period after that, Chair. That is a draft report before the committee for its input, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, members. There we have the report, the program for the next quarter for the PC. I want to just alert members of the committee that the minister mentioned legislation. I think it's the Companies Amendment Act that might be coming to us. So if that does happen, we know that legislation takes precedence, and then the program will obviously then be rearranged. But that is the program. Can I see if there's any comment by any member? If not,
Mr. Mbuyani, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. Honorable Mbuyani.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, for the program. I think, as you alluded to, Chair, that in principle, we need to adopt the program as a committee, so that if any other changes that might come to from the cabinet around the Companies Act, we will also be infected in the program, Chair. I propose that we adopt the program as a working program for the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mbuyani. Can we have a seconder to that proposal for adoption of the third quarter program? Honorable Moakse.
Thank you very much, Chair. Seconded.
Thank you very much. So our program is then duly adopted, subject to, of course, the House Chairperson signing off on our oversight at the beginning of the quarter. Thank you very much. That concludes the business for today, members. Thank you very much. So we'll see each other, I think, at the end of August when we resume. Thank you very much. Any other announcements, Committee Secretary?
Chair, no further announcements. We will just, as when we have approval, we will then communicate directly with members in terms of arrangements regarding the oversight, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The meeting stands adjourned.
Thank you.